we are actually bringing on Jorge, the founder of Masienda Bodega, and he will be on in a second. But if you, for those who aren't familiar, you can check out Project NOSH. So that way, we wrote about them in September. Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Nice to meet you in person finally as well.
Thank you. Likewise.
So like I was saying, for those who maybe aren't as familiar or didn't catch our story in September, do you mind just telling our viewers a little bit just about how you started the business as just a corn supplier for high-end chefs and restaurants?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, our mission is to elevate the everyday tortilla through a return to its origins. And origins is sort of the word we want to pick apart here because there's sort of two approaches to that. One is to make sure that we have the best quality supply chain to do that. And the origin of tortillas is in Mexico. So that's how we started for our first 3 years, was building that supply chain responsibly and in a really sort of marketable way, working with some of the best chefs in the world to get there. And then the next step was to then take that ingredient and add value to it. So getting to the origins of how recipes were sort of driven to make a tortilla and using time-tested tradition to kind of go back.
I'm going to cut you off for a quick second,
sure.
Just to make sure so everyone can hear us. Just make sure your mic is super
Absolutely.
close.
Are we
that was
okay
a
now?
great answer. Yes, that's perfect.
Great.
I want to make sure everyone can hear him at all.
Sure.
So just kind of going off of that then, how do you think your product specifically is different from other tortillas on the market?
Yeah, you know, we are really excited that we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're not, we want to really think of ourselves as an enduring presence in the category, and truly our differentiation is that sourcing story. I mean, that's huge. You know, we have a direct connection to our supply chain for one of the most at-risk crops with regards to genetic contamination. So that's one. Two is going back to those basics and kind of eliminating the convenience factor in production to accentuate the flavor and the actual, the user experience, the nutrition that you get from something. And that's a 10,000-year-old recipe that has been around for a long time, but we've lost touch with it. There are really few, there are actually really no national options to choose from when you're approaching a tortilla with that kind of criteria. So our sourcing and our actual recipe development is huge for us. And then obviously, I think what we're trying to do is position that toward the next generation of consumers. Thinking outside of kind of the ethnic category itself and thinking about, well, this checks a lot of boxes that we're all talking about at Project NOSH today. Mm-hmm. You know, the fact that this is a plant-based food, the fact that this is naturally gluten-free. You can kind of write a lot of different stories around this product. What is it that's going to stick with the next generation of consumers to appeal to a much wider audience than what we've seen for tortillas to date?
And I think that's a big point, too, that we're seeing with a lot of brands and companies who are trying to create products that kind of fit more specific ethnic areas or cultures. And it's the fact that those consumers have a high expectation, and we talked about this before, have a high expectation of what that product is. So it's harder to win those over. So can you talk about how that shaped just your overall decision to target a wider consumer versus someone who traditionally understands and knows and eats tortillas all the time?
Yeah. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, what you're saying is just sort of like what's the market approach?
Yeah.
Essentially. I mean, for us, it's that's what this first phase is of Masienda Bodega. It's understanding what name do we even want to use? Should we be calling ourselves Masienda, which is how most folks know us, or kind of appeal to kind of a new opportunity with kind of a new identity? For us, the biggest thing is, taking the time that's needed to understand who that customer is and who that tribe is. For the last 3 years, that's been restaurants. And frankly, a restaurant consumer, a chef or, a hospitality group looks a lot different than the average consumer at the store level. So the most exciting thing for us has just been listening. The last 4 months since we've launched in SoPac and Northeast has been about just really understanding who that is and that it looks different from, across both regions. Ultimately, stitching together some of those patterns to then double down on what that tribe is and who we need to really speak to and how. It's nothing, I think, terribly revolutionary, except for the fact that no one has really been looking at this space, mm-hmm. and yet it's a $12 billion category that's been here all along, is growing really naturally, but sort of no one's really taken that time to understand until recently, kind of what is making consumers tick and purchase this kind of really plain, unassuming looking staple mm-hmm. over and over and over again.
Absolutely. And you just mentioned, so you launched in September, and you had your products online before that.
Yeah.
You were in 200 stores to launch. has happened? What's new since then? Have you added more stores, or have you learned anything else?
Yeah, we're really excited. I mean, SoPac has been, like I said, SoPac and Northeast have been very different regions, so we've been spending as much time as possible to listen to those consumers before we kind of fall on our face trying to go too fast too soon. So we've been really proud of our team being able to kind of show that restraint and listen as much as we can in a smaller sample. Getting out there, getting into demos. We've done, on an average, about 75 demos a month in each region we've been in, which has given us an enormous amount of data. And also just the traction that we're seeing, the week-to-week and month-to-month growth has been significant, and showing now that we're getting to those category averages and now surpassing them in a lot of cases. So, something's working, and now we're trying to understand what is it about what's working so we can stick to that and double down next.
And you also, upon your launch, closed a round of funding that was in part backed by acclaimed chef Rick Bayless. So that was huge for you guys. Since Bayless is not a stranger just to CPG himself with his Frontera line, what strategies or insights has he brought to the table or been able to provide as just someone who could be an advisor to the brand or just a mentor in terms of CPG?
Of course. There's the obvious connection to a legacy brand to me because I grew up using it. But the idea that Frontera has been around and has blazed a trail for Masienda to even be here. Obviously, there's key insights that we rely on from them to kind of give us sort of sound logic into our next steps, but also recognizing that Masienda is a really focused brand on one line of products right now, which is tortillas. We're not necessarily looking to be the next Goya or Kraft. We really want to focus on this commodity, which is now a commodity, and take it to an elevated status. So I think there's best practices that Rick gives, but I think more than anything, it's just the encouragement that, hey, this is possible to build something from scratch for a product that most people are probably like, wait, why are you focusing on tortillas and why are you focusing on this ethnic category? His advisory role really transcends kind of the CPG and the culinary sort of go-to that you would think, and also just kind of overall, it's always great to have people in your camp that had been through it before.
Oh, always, for sure. And you just kind of brought up the idea that tortillas are a commodity item, and we had talked about that previously. Just as specifically in the U.S., they really are thought of as a commodity item versus other areas. Yeah. And you've been trying to challenge that and show consumers that it doesn't have to be that. So how has that education process gone thus far? I know you mentioned demos, but are you utilizing social media at all? Or what's the marketing strategy around that?
The marketing strategy is we're obviously appealing to social media, as you mentioned, some digital ad campaigns as well, in a really focused, measured way, so we're not spending too much in any one place before we know the efficacy. Truly, the biggest thing is listening. Again, it's like we want to create as much data as we can before we act on that data. And for the last 3 years, we have been an ingredient supplier, and we've listened to that data to get us to this point today. Like, tortillas are where we want to go. This is where the opportunity is. Now, how do we sell those tortillas? So we're really in this collection period right now, this mining period, which really is going to take place for the next 6 months. And every month we're evaluating sort of as we get closer to understanding that core consumer, how we got to that place in the first place. The truth is that we're learning an amazing amount of data about the kind of misinformation that's out there. The fact that most folks don't know that a corn tortilla is a plant-based food, essentially. That it's a naturally gluten-free product. These are things that, coming from the culinary industry, it's like these are kind of no-brainers, right? But learning that we have a lot of remediation to do first, and the key is to understand what that remediation is instead of kind of approaching it from the way we have in the last 3 years. And
that just goes back to your idea of that it's a different consumer than chefs who know about the food space versus the everyday average consumer who is interested in getting a new tortilla for their Taco Tuesday.
Of course. And the great thing is that at the end of the day, this is a staple that you can use that is incredibly good for you when it's done right, the way we're doing. And honestly, it can sort of lend itself to any true meal occasion. So again, it's the exciting thing is, now that we're understanding who that person is, that there's so much opportunity within that category once you nail it.
And personally, I just think that they're super tasty.
Yeah,
I crushed it pretty easily, my first bag of them. Jorge, we are out of time. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm so glad we got a chance to meet in person as well.
Great to meet you in person. Thanks,
Have a good one.